Next on Link TV, Latin Pulse, news and analysis from Latin America as seen by Latin American media, followed by a panel discussion on the issues. Next on Latin Pulse, only on Link TV.
The following program is an original production of Link TV.
Natural resources, once seen as an endless source of raw materials, now in short supply for those living south of the border. How would that impact your pocketbook? This and more coming up next on Latin Pulse. Hello and welcome to Pulso Latino. I'm your host, Ana Cuevas.
Nosotros tenemos una necesidad energética importante.
Our first topic tonight, natural resources in Latin America and why this should be of concern to us in the United States.
Tenemos que encontrar el equilibrio entre la extracción y el uso de los recursos.
It was once a useless byproduct of oil exploration, but today natural gas is an important source of energy the world over. Nowhere is this more evident than in Latin America, where natural gas is a huge commodity, almost as important as oil itself. In Argentina, all taxi cabs now operate on natural gas instead of gasoline. But shortages of the gas have forced severe restrictions on its domestic sales. Cabs now line up for blocks waiting to fill their tanks, and as expected, taxi drivers aren't happy.
Y bueno, gas no hay. Y ahí tengo muerto de risa el tanque del gas. ¿Por qué? Y no puedo cargar. ¿Por qué? Y porque lo tienen que vender a Chile, porque lo tienen que vender a otro lado. ¿Y nosotros nos cagamos de infeliz? No.
Traditional natural gas providers like Argentina are now cutting back their exports in order to satisfy their own domestic needs. This is having serious implications for other gas-consuming countries, such as Chile, as we see in this report from Chile's Canal 13.
No habla de crisis energética, pero esta se nota. Poco gas y cortes de luz en distintos puntos del país. Las medidas para prevenirlo resultan insólitas. En Mendoza, una escuela fue multada por tener la luz de las salas de clase encendidas. En Chile la escasez impactó directamente.
La situación es exactamente igual que ayer a estas horas de la mañana. Los envíos hasta el momento son de cero. Ellos están en este momento reunidos viendo cómo ha evolucionado la demanda, cómo ha evolucionado las distintas medidas que han implementado, y en un par de horas más nos debieran llamar y decir cuánto va a ser posible que inyecten durante el día de hoy.
Esta tarde se restableció el envío, pero menos de la tercera parte de lo que necesitan los comercios y servicios para funcionar en Chile. Buena parte del problema se debe a la baja en la producción del gas. Esto impacta directamente en los más pobres.
Un 40% de argentinos que no tienen gas natural y tienen que pagar el GLP, la garrafa.
Otros están peor, deben pasar el intenso frío de los últimos días en la calle.
The reduction in gas exports from Argentina has created a sort of gas fever in Chile. The government is now promoting natural gas exploration by opening new fields to private investors.
La pregunta es por qué recién ahora se lanza la iniciativa si la falta de combustible es una realidad conocida desde hace años.
Nosotros tenemos una necesidad energética importante, pero además esta situación se da en un momento en que es muy atractivo venir a invertir en Chile, porque los precios internacionales del petróleo y del gas hacen que proyectos que antes no eran rentables, hoy día sí tengan un potencial de viabilidad comercial importante.
En 2 años, las exploraciones cubrirán unos 32.000 kilómetros cuadrados, el equivalente a 50 veces la superficie del Gran Santiago. Un esfuerzo enorme, aunque por ahora nadie se atreve a anticipar cuánto gas podría extraerse desde aquí.
In California, one utility company is promoting the use of energy-efficient light bulbs as a way to minimize carbon emissions and reduce global warming. In Argentina, there is a similar campaign to use energy-efficient light bulbs to save gas and electricity, as we see in this report from Argentina's Tele 7.
Hay que esperarlas. Las lámparas de bajo consumo tardan unos 10 minutos en adquirir todo su potencial, pero a partir de entonces iluminan tan bien como las otras y gastan mucho menos.
Emiten un flujo luminoso equivalente al de las lámparas incandescentes, pero consumiendo 5 veces menos potencia luminosa. Otras ventajas que tenemos es que duran muchísimo más siempre que la calidad así lo permita, ¿verdad?
Para que duren lo que promete el envase, el ingeniero recomienda comprar primeras marcas. Según el ingeniero, el uso correcto del gas en la cocina y el apagado de los termotanques y calefones cuando no se usan ahorrarían entre un 20 y un 30% de consumo de gas en una casa.
The shortage of natural gas is also affecting consumers in other parts of Latin America. In Ecuador, for example, it's the black market that's now determining who has access to this natural resource. Here's this report from Ecuador's Canal 1.
En Daule, Tomás Martínez y Aníbal Enríquez son los dos únicos distribuidores autorizados de Duragas desde hace 20 años. Sin embargo, no tienen el combustible. ¿Cuánto dinero por impuestos paga aproximadamente al año?
Más o menos como $200 pago por año.
¿Y el clandestino?
No paga nada, no paga nada. Y gana más que nosotros porque ellos venden a $2.50.
Pero en las calles de Daule todo marcha normal. Los negocios de comida y ciudadanos en sus casas cocinan sin problema. La respuesta es simple. Pagan el precio que les piden por el cilindro de 15 kilos. Aunque hay excepciones, como este negocio, el que aún cocina con carbón.
In Mexico, oil and natural gas seem to be plentiful for now. But one resource that's becoming harder to find is one that we take for granted here in the U.S., water. Mexico's Canal 11 reports there are 12 million people in Mexico without access to drinking water.
Las bajas tarifas por el servicio de agua potable, la deteriorada infraestructura para su distribución y la falta de inversión provocan que 12 millones de personas de las zonas más pobres del país no reciban este líquido.
Que son, por cierto, los más pobres del país y los que tienen que pagar más por el precio del agua.
Por ello, especialistas hacen un llamado a empresarios y gobiernos para invertir en soluciones tecnológicas y terminar con el rezago en la distribución de agua.
Tenemos que lograr sanear la totalidad de nuestras aguas para hacer sustentables nuestros recursos. Tenemos que encontrar el equilibrio entre la extracción y el uso de los recursos.
Una solución para proveer adecuadamente agua potable es invertir 22.000 millones de pesos en infraestructura.
¿De dónde van a salir los dineros para pagar este capital? Bueno, de las cuotas que paguemos cada uno de nosotros en forma responsable por lo que vale el agua.
A nivel de los ciudadanos proponen captar el agua de lluvia, principalmente en las regiones del sureste del país donde se requiere de mayor inversión para abastecer el líquido.
Also in Mexico, deforestation is becoming a serious issue in areas where illegal sawmills have been established to exploit forest on public lands. Those who live in these areas say they're afraid to blow the whistle on the sawmills. They fear for their lives and those of their families. The environmental group Greenpeace says it has detected at least 5 locations in the Ajusto region where these illegal sawmills are operating.
Es un área que alcanza casi 2.700 hectáreas afectadas en esta zona y que se encuentra justo entre la comunidad de Santo Tomás Ajusco, que estaría para allá, y el municipio de Jalatlaco.
Joining us to discuss the issues surrounding natural resources in Latin America, we have in our studio today Leila Salazar Lopez from the organization Rainforest Action Network RAN, and Charlie Huizenga, board member of Agua para la Vida, Water for Life. And from Washington, D.C., we're joined by Eric Toledo, project director of the New Forest Project. Thank you very much for joining us. When it comes to Latin America, it's a region that's very rich in natural resources. In the case of water, Mr. Huizenga, why the shortages?
Well, in the case of water, specifically what I work in is drinking water, and it's less a shortage of the resource than it is of the infrastructure to get the resource to the people. So in Latin America in general, there's pretty good coverage of drinking water. I think 90% of the people have access to clean water, but in several of the Central American countries, Nicaragua, for example, it's more like 40% or so of the rural population does not have access to safe water. And that's a result of not having infrastructure through either gravity flow systems or wells that are protected from surface water. So they don't have access to the resource that's there. It's an infrastructure problem.
Could the same be said about all of the other natural resources then, that it's a problem of infrastructure basically?
I don't think so. I think each are different. I mean, for example, you look at the energy sector, and In many countries, a large percentage of the energy comes from imported fossil fuel, for example. So that's a case of a resource that's just not available in a particular country. Other countries do have fossil fuels in Latin America. So I think it is unique to the particular resource. And many of them tie together, for example, with water and forests. There's obviously a big connection there between deforestation and the protection of the water resource and the issue of soil erosion. So as forests are becoming cleared, then you have a lot more runoff of that water, which means the water isn't being retained into the land. And so you have runoff, it's contributing to flooding the rivers and a lack of water locally where it's needed. So they all tie together in many ways.
And Ms. Salazar, what kind of pressures then are these countries under from the outside as trying to get the lumber and trying to use the rainforest in a way to generate some money?
Well, in the case of the Amazon is the world's largest forest. It's the most mega diverse, biologically and culturally diverse place on the planet. It is also where 1/5 of the world's water comes from. It's, so it's a large source of water. You pretty much hit the nail on the head when you said deforestation is directly related to shortage of water. Actually, the Amazon right now is facing a drought. It's in the 3rd year of a drought, and scientists say that when there's a drought in the Amazon, that actually could cause serious implications for climate change. Countries in Latin America have been pressured by entities, by banks, by corporations to extract natural resources like lumber, like oil, like natural gas, like minerals. And they are under that pressure, but to take out natural resources. But there is also an issue of inequality in how those resources are being extracted and who it's benefiting. Right now, U.S. agribusiness companies, some of the largest companies in the world, companies such as ADM, Cargill, Bunge, they're taking advantage of planting soy, for example.
But that's actually something that I wanted to address with Mr. Toledo. Aren't these countries in the right to be able to use that natural resource of the forest to be able to compete on the national level?
Well, I think that, first of all, I think that the problem that we have in our countries is a problem of mismanagement of natural resources. I think that for many years, I think that we've been using a lot of resources in a way that we thought it was, it was basically available. And I think that we are facing a different situation now when we notice it and we realize that those resources are limited. So I think it's being a problem of management, right? That anything else. But I agree with the previous panelists too.
Are the natural resources really limited? Because I know that there's a lot of interest in the region as far as natural resources and exploration. So the natural resources are there. It's not that it's limited. So what is at the core of the problem?
Well, natural resources are limited by itself. I mean, there is as much oil or as much water as you have in this world. So, I mean, if you use those resources in a way that is irresponsible, you might have, to face the consequences of, less resources in the future. So I think that, what looks to be like an abundant sources, lumber, water, oil is not really unlimited, it's limited.
So what is the solution? What do you see as one of the things that can be done in order to help bring that, Mr. Huizenga?
Well, I think that's what we're just talking about is the management of this, is what might seem like an infinite resource to an individual as a nation or as a part of the world is really important to look at a larger scale. For example, deforestation is happening at an incredible rate. And in the zone where I work in rural Nicaragua, they estimate that 25% of the natural forests have disappeared in the decade of the 90s alone. That's a huge change in the natural resource. And the solution there is a combination, I think, of policy and education, of letting people know what the links between, say in this case, deforestation have to water quality and water quantity and quality of life and health, and also the economic viability of the region in the long term. And I think this trade-off between short-term gain from selling a resource that's being extracted, and potentially not even that value being staying in the local community, but rather being extracted by, say, another entity that's coming in and taking advantage of it, versus a longer-term vision of how a community can sustain development over the longer term and maintain that resource and manage it in a responsible way.
And also, Ms. Salazar, what type of responsibility does the United States have in all of this?
Well, as I was mentioning earlier, U.S. corporations are directly benefiting from resource extraction in Latin America. And, you know, it is our responsibility as huge players in the world, it is our responsibility to hold the U.S. companies, our U.S. government, U.S. financial institutions accountable when they're, you know, profiting from rainforest destruction. 150 acres of rainforest are destroyed every minute. You know, it may, as Mr. Toledo mentioned, it may seem like there's endless rainforests, but 20% of the Amazon is gone. We need to hold U.S. corporations accountable to high standards. They can't go to another country and not, you know, and think that they could just take advantage of the people. I mean, there's actually slaves working on soy fields in the Amazon.
But should the U.S. then have a role in reversing this trend?
Yes, I mean, you know, just because we deforest, just because we have only 4% of our ancient forests left, do we want to send that same model to the rest of Latin America? Do we want the Amazon to dry up? If the Amazon dries up, we will not have any rain in North America. The rain clouds that we get in North America are formed in the Amazon. We will have no irrigation for our crops. What are we going to eat? You know, I mean, this is directly related to climate change, and we need to hold U.S. corporations accountable to high standards. They can't just deforest the Amazon to make profits.
And Mr. Toledo, but that places the countries in a very difficult situation, because on one hand, they want to be able to compete on the world level, but on the other hand, you have the developed world telling them we need to conserve. How do you convince a country that has shortages in natural gas and tell them, sorry, you can't explore even though you have the resources?
That's a very difficult question to answer. I think that the U.S. In general is playing a positive and negative role in the use of the resources around the world, and I think it was in part because it's being a dominant player in the whole world. I think that there are some other players these years or these days that used to be not that important in the past. So it's more like a global, a more complex situation today. But what I'm seeing as a positive thing is that now we know and we have better technology. We learn from the mistakes that we did in the past, and I think that we are in a position to probably use the best management practice for the management of natural resources. I think that we should use that, and we should, persuade governments and corporations to adopt those practices.
So what kind of positive role do you think the United States government can play in this, and the United States as a country per se?
I think Latin America is being a significant part or important part of the U.S. economy, just because we're basically the closest neighbors. So I think that in the past, it influenced the government in the way of regulation, international regulations. I think that most of the regulations that we implement in our countries, I think they were basically adopted or they were mirrored from whatever was implemented in the United States before.
So you're talking about foreign policy, and that same question, Mr. Huizenga, what kind of positive role can the United States play in this?
Well, two things come to mind. One is I totally agree that we can't just say, well, we've extracted our resources, now you have to stop this, so we can make the planet work out. But I think there are leadership by example where we can demonstrate ways of managing resources in a way that's of benefit to the local people. I think that's a critical piece, is to keep the local inhabitants, they're aware and they receive a benefit for proper management, or what we see as sustainable management. And the other model that's, I think, becoming more and more popular, particularly with the effects of climate change and the issue of carbon emissions, is payment for environmental services. I mean, these natural resources have real value. An intact rainforest, as we were talking about, has a lot of value to the entire world. And that maybe there's a way to reflect that in terms of a payment for that service, so that it does have value to keep it and to manage it sustainably, as opposed to just extracting it. At the moment, really the only economic value for that kind of resource is to extract it. But in fact, we want to pay for not extracting it.
There's actually an example. The country of Ecuador, the government of Ecuador has actually made a call to the United States and to the entire world, saying, so you all are telling us we shouldn't destroy the southern Amazon, the land where the Shuar and the Achuar and the Quechua people live, you know, one of the most intact rainforests in all of the world. We shouldn't destroy Yasuni National Park, a UN World Heritage Site. Well, then help us do that. Help us, you know, instead of, you know, having the oil companies go in or the logging companies go in, you know, and they're offering us all of this money for concessions, how about the international community pay us,
and also offering
so that we can save
some kind of support.
You know, that we can do ecotourism, we can do different things to protect these areas. The government of Brazil is doing the same thing. They've set up national parks, they've set up indigenous peoples' territories so that those areas can be protected, but they need help from the international community. The U.S. could set an example by helping with those kinds of things. Instead of funding, you know, destructive projects, the U.S. could fund protection of these types of, you know, natural resources, these national parks. The U.S. could also sign the Kyoto Protocol.
Difficult balance, not easy solutions. I want to thank our natural resources panelists here in San Francisco, Leila Salazar Lopez from the organization Rainforest Action Network RAN, and Charlie Haisenga, board member of Agua para la Vida, Water for Life. And from Washington, D.C., Eric Toledo, project director of the New Forest Project. I would also like to thank you at home or on the web for being with us today. We also want to thank the American University in Washington, D.C., and the students at the School of Communication for helping with the research for this program. Join us next time when we take a closer look at Latin America through the eyes of Latin American media. For more information about Pulso Latino and Latin America, log on to linktv.org. I'm Ana Cuevas. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time here on Latin Pulse.
Latin Pulse was made possible thanks to the generous contribution from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. Pulso Latino ha sido posible gracias a la generosa contribución de la Fundación John D. y Catherine T. MacArthur.
This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. network dedicated to global and national news, uncompromising documentaries, and diverse cultural programs. Programs that connect you to the world.